VLOOKUP is one of the most widely used Excel functions. VLOOKUP stands for vertical lookup, and is a function that allows you to search for a certain value in a column, in a vertical table or range. In short, you use VLOOKUP when you need to find values in a table that is organized vertically. Now, similarly to VLOOKUP, there is a lesser known variant called HLOOKUP that you can use to look up information in a horizontal table or range. Hence the name HLOOKUP, which refers to horizontal lookup. I know this can be confusing, so let's look at some examples. Let's go hands-on and work with these functions one by one to understand their strengths and how they differ. So make sure to use the workbook to follow up the lesson along. Okay, back in Excel, we are in the first worksheet in the book, and we can see a table with customer information, containing among other data the customer IDs in the first column. Next, we have the contact name and last name, followed by the name of the customer company. Now, here on the right, I'm going to represent a simple form or report. Ideally, we should use a separate worksheet, but in this case, we'll do it here, just to better use our space in the screen. The idea is that I want to be able to type in a customer ID, for example, 11, and look up the value in the table in order to obtain the company name back. This is a basic example, simple, but perfect to start understanding how VLOOK and HLOOKUP work. Before we go into action, let's take a moment to make sure our data is organized properly. First, make sure that the value we'll be using as key to look up is the first column, the leftmost in the table. In this case, we'll be looking at the customer ID, and in our table, the customer ID is indeed the first or leftmost column. If you are using your own worksheet and data and you need to rearrange the order of the columns or fields, feel free to do it before starting to use VLOOKUP. Second, make sure that your lookup column is sorted or organized correctly and in ascending order. This helps make sure we look up all the right values during a search. In our example, customer IDs are properly organized from 1 to 20. In case you are using names or words as your lookup values, make sure they are sorted in alphabetical order A to Z. Third, make sure that your report or form and the table have common fields that you can use to make connections. For example, here we are looking at a customer IDs and the table has a customer ID field. Lastly, as we have reviewed in the previous modules, it also helps when we work with tables. Although not strictly necessary, and you can work with ranges, it extremely simplifies the process and helps you avoid potential errors. So, that said, let's convert our range into a table. As we've been doing during the course, for the purpose to keep the sample data in its original format so you can play with it again, I'm going to make a copy of this worksheet and call it Data Table. But you can go ahead and turn yours into a table directly. Okay, as you know, I simply select a cell in the range, then click Ctrl T. My table has headers, and now I'll name the table Client List. Okay, now we want to enter our VLOOK function, so let's go over here and click the cell where I want the name to appear. As you know, I can start typing equals VLOOKUP, and Excel will give me the option to add the function directly. But in this case, to make sure things are very clear on what we'll be doing, we'll use a different path that is more illustrative and will be helpful so you can better understand the process. Let's delete our entry and instead go to the formula bar, click on the FX and type VLOOKUP in the search area, and press enter or click on go. From the results, double-click on VLOOKUP. This opens a prompt where we can enter all the function arguments. Doing it this way will help you understand what is going on. First, we need a lookup value. In our case, we want to look up customer ID, which will be entered in this cell. Again, 11, for example. So I'm going to select G3 as the lookup value. We can change in the prompt window and see right here that we are using the correct value. Okay. Next, we need to enter the table array, which is where we'll do the lookup. In this case, we want to look up against our table. So we select the entire table. Remember that one of the benefits of using tables is that it can automatically account for new entries, which means that in this case, our VLOOKUP will automatically update and continue working if later on we add more clients to the table. Using tables will help avoid errors in the long run. Great. Next, in the VLOOK arguments is the column index number. At this point, the function is looking up for the value 11 in the table. The column index argument basically asks for, once we find the value, which columns do you want me to show you in return? In our example, we want the company name column, which is the 1, 2, 3, 4, fourth column in the table. The prompt is asking for a number value, so we enter 4, as we want the fourth column as result. We can already see that our VLOOKUP is working, as Mobile North is the company associated with customer ID 11. But there's still one more step, the range lookup, which helps define the level of accuracy or flexibility we want to get in the results. There are two options, a value of true if we want approximates, closest matches, or false, which will search for an exact match. In our example, that's what we want. So let's enter false to get exact matches. And we look up at the value of 11 exactly. Click on OK, and we get the results as expected. Now, because we have VLOOKUP set up here, we can enter a different customer ID. For example, customer ID 14. And that will show us the company associated with the customer ID 14. Great, now we have VLOOKUP working for us. But what will happen if we enter a wrong or non-existing customer ID? For example, let's try ID 21. Because the ID doesn't exist in the table, Excel gives us an error. This is not very friendly, so let's fix that. We are going to use another function. This one is called ifError. It basically allows us to display a more friendly result if an error is encountered. For this, select the cell containing the VLOOKUP function. We'll use the formula bar to edit. Click after the equal sign and before the VLOOKUP function, and type ifError. That will open the parentheses, and you'll see that now we have two arguments. One is the value, and the other is the ifError. So the first one would mean that if there's no error, what should be displayed? In that case, if there's no error, then we just want to display the output of the VLOOKUP. So we leave the lookup here as the first argument. But if there's an error, we want to display some message. So let's enter a comma and enter our second argument. We can put some quotes and perhaps say not found, which is better than Excel's error result. Close the quotes and the parentheses. Now just press enter, and now you can see that Excel is showing the message instead of the error. Way more friendlier and informative. We can try different entries, all seem to be working well, including our new message for non-existing IDs. Moving on, let's see how closest match works. Remember, we had the choice to look for exact match, which is what we did using the false argument, or for a closest match using the true argument. To illustrate this, let's use the worksheet called Grades. Here we have two tables, one containing data on students, organized by student number or ID. We have the result for a test, but we need to come up with their grades according to this other table on the right, which is organized by student mark in ascending order, which you remember is mandatory, from 0 to 95 and their grade equivalent. If we were to use exact match for this case, any result that doesn't match the marks in the grading table will return an error. For example, 53 won't match. However, using closest match, if you have a mark of 53, which didn't reach the particular 60 value, it will drop to the immediate lower value. In other words, any mark between 0 and 34 will return a fail. Any mark between 35 and 59 will return an E, and so on. Okay, to start, let's insert the VLOOKUP within E3. This time, now that you have a better understanding of how it works, we'll type the function directly. So, equals, then VLOOKUP, select the function, and in this case our lookup value is the test results, which is in D2. Then add a comma, select the table array just as we did in the previous example, with grade equivalence being the name of the table. Then another comma and the column index number, which is what we want in return, in this case the grades, which are column 2 in this table. Comma, and we finalize with the true argument, as we are looking for closest match. Now, we close with parentheses and press enter. There you go. Now the results show the grades according to our equivalent table. If we were working with a cell range instead of a table, we will have to make sure we use absolute references. With tables, every time we reference a range of columns, Excel sets them up as absolute. This method will work well even if you had your tables in different worksheets, which is recommended. Now, let's take a look at HLOOKUP. For this, let's use the grades H worksheet you'll find in the workbook. So far, we've been doing vertical lookups, but in this case, we'll be looking against a horizontal table, so we need to do a horizontal lookup. The process is very similar to VLOOKUP. Again, we select the grade to enter the function. Let's use again the formula bar to make things obvious and type or select HLOOKUP. This will look familiar to you already. Our lookup value is the result, so just like before, we use D2. For table array, we select the horizontal range. Now, please note that for this exercise, although it looks like a table, we are actually using a regular range, not a table. This will help to illustrate a different scenario. Okay, now, instead of column index, it says row index number, so we'll use the second row in the selected range, which is the one we need to display for results, so enter 2. For range lookup, again, we'll use true for approximates, and press enter. Now, what is happening? You'll see our first result is correct, but the rest show errors. Well, the problem is that when you use regular cell ranges instead of tables, by default Excel uses relative references. Look at the formula. The first one is correct and refers to the array. However, as we go through the grade columns, you'll see that the other results are phased out. Remember that tables use absolute references by default when working with a range of columns. But if we use a regular range, we need to make the reference absolute manually. The easiest way is by clicking the first cell in grades to bring the formula, select the range, and then press F4 in your keyboard, and the range will turn into an absolute reference. Now press enter, and there you go. Our HLOOKUP is working.